Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for downloading another episode from the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. I am the Doc, John Macaroon, and this is another episode of the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast, our third week. And if you can hear a little bit extra excitement in my voice this morning, it's because, if you listen, I'm a diehard Sparty baby, and we took it down at the very last moment yesterday. Wow. What an exciting game. I'm thrilled to be able to be one of the first people to talk about it and get it out there and talk about my excitement from the Sparty perspective. Thank you. What a great game. And in the situation for me, I was in a all University of Michigan house. 20 people, one Sparty, and that was me. And at that point, we were talking about how Jim Harbaugh could write his own check. He should be just given a blank check by Michigan. How amazing it was that he's turned the program around that fast. Everyone was all excited. And then, that last play, the botched punt, was really fascinating in that all the punter had to do was kick the ball and the game was over. Michigan State had committed 11 guys on the line to block that punt. So in essence, he makes that punt, the game is over. Or if, he botches the snap, he just falls on it, and Michigan State was not going to be able to effectively kick a field goal from 57 yards. They would have had to run a play. Fascinating game. I wonder where it's going to rank among the top stories this week on the Detroit Sports Countdown Show. But, in honor of my buddy, Kenny Frenzel, we do have some honorable mentions, some news and notes that don't make the top 5 this week in the world of Detroit sports. And one of the early Kenny Frenzel honorable mentions will be the fact that the Detroit Lions last week were destroyed by Arizona, and Golden Tate came out on Sunday after the game. Some of the other players came out and were talking like, wow, the fans kind of let us down. We kind of need a little bit of extra support from the fans, because at that point, people were coming late versus the game, coming late to the game, versus Arizona. The vibe was a little bit down. Now, granted, Lions, you did come into that game 0-4, playing terribly. And a lot of people just, at this point in time, are maybe not into you. I don't know if you didn't take that into account. But a lot of the fans didn't enjoy the game. A lot of the fans, after watching that abomination of a performance versus Arizona, just up and left by halftime. So Golden Tate came out and talked about we need different level of support from the fans. I just think the Lions need to focus on putting a better product on the field. And then these fans are rabid. That these fans will cheer. I just recall being at that game. My wife bought me tickets to the Monday night game versus the Bears, in a game where I can recall the atmosphere and the vibe was like no other I had ever seen. It was loud. It was boisterous. Very different energy in that game versus Chicago on Monday night back in October several years back. It was very different. And that's because the Lions were playing better, and the fans, when they get behind you as an organization, they can definitely be that 12th man like in Seattle. But when you put on performances like that versus Arizona, forget it. You're not going to get any kind of support. So the Lions chirping about the fans, honorable mention. They earned the Kenny Frenzel honorable mention this week. All right, let's get into the top 5 countdown as ranked by myself, the Doc. Number 5, about the Red Wings. Earlier this week, it was announced that it was talked about that Johan Franzen was re-experiencing concussion symptoms, and it's really an unfortunate situation in that we knew, the likelihood of him making it through the whole year was kind of slim, but you just really feel bad for a guy that can be a contributor for this team. A strong power forward, a guy that, if you recall back in the day, the Red Wings chose over a Marian Hossa. They gave a long-term contract to Johan Franzen because of the fact that he was a solid playoff performer. Now, he's just a dominant power forward, one that you need in the NHL. But unfortunately, he just has experienced several concussion symptoms, and it's right along the talk now with, several other players in the league, that have dealt with concussions. What do? He's tried to make valiant efforts, but each time he makes a comeback, there's always been setbacks. He's been dealing with headaches, been dealing with, some of the pitfalls, some of the symptoms that you inevitably get when you deal with concussions. And it's so unfortunate for a guy, for Johan Franzen, and in all likelihood, it's going to mark the end of his playing career. I don't see a scenario where Johan Franzen is going to be able to play 15, 20 games at the NHL level. I was shocked, like a lot of other people, that in the preseason this year for the Wings, he was out there throwing checks. He was out there trying to be physical. And it really must be tough on a guy like that because he knows the kind of game that he's got to play. And with the symptoms that he has, he knows that he's not going to be able to, enforce. He's not going to be able to be an enforcer on the ice. He's going to have to be very, very careful with his health. So, in my honest opinion, a guy like Johan Franzen should just hang it up. It's a situation where you don't want to risk long-term health. I know it's tough to retire as a player. I know it's tough to know when it's time to hang it up. But a guy like Johan Franzen really needs to consult with his team, consult with his family, and hopefully he has a friend that can tell him, listen, sit down. Your long-term health is way more important than a game. Please take it under advisement to do what you can to really lead a quality life and to do things in the right ways. And it's going to be imperative that he makes this choice rather quickly because, if he continues this comeback, what's going to happen in a tough series versus the Rangers, or what's going to happen down the line if he gets checked by one of these massive, massive wingers? You got to remember, if you go to a hockey game and you sit relatively close, these boys are huge. They're averaging 6'1", 200 pounds, and they're skating at full force. They're bigger, stronger, and the players on the ice are bigger, stronger, and faster. And it's just unfortunate that, Johan Franzen is going to be a victim of retiring not on his own terms. He's going to be forced to retire just based on his concussion symptoms. So Johan Franzen, the number 5 story this week on the Detroit Sports Podcast Countdown. Number 4. I read an article earlier this week in the Detroit News, I believe, and it really relates to what should be done now with the future of J.D. Martinez, a player that came off of a really solid season this year, a guy that the Detroit Tigers picked up, rather cheaply from the Houston Astros. I mean, he was let go, and I wonder if the Astros are kicking themselves each and every day when they really look at what did they give up. They gave up a guy who was young, powerful, who just maybe needed that extra coaching to perform better and play much better. And what he's done with the Tigers the last 2 years has been really short of remarkable. It's just been unbelievable what he's done. J.D. Martinez is a guy with power. He's a guy with great speed. He's a guy that can play the outfield and can be a solid contributor for the Tigers for many years to come. So the gist of the article was, and the number 4 ranked story this week on the Detroit Sports Countdown podcast, the Tigers should give J.D. Martinez a long-term deal now. And I 100% agree with that. And here's the rationale behind that thinking. J.D. Martinez is likely going to be a 35 to 45 home run a year guy. And if you don't lock him up now, if you don't lock up his services for many years to come, then you're looking at a situation where you might be looking at losing him to a team like the Dodgers, the Yankees, who would have no problem paying him in the $25 million a year range if he can continue this 35 to 40 home run pace. So it behooves the Tigers to seriously look at what's it going to take to lock up J.D. Martinez here in Detroit for a long period of time. Because if you do it now, you might be able to, get him at a price that's reasonable within the limits of the organization. Now, you got to remember, at the highest end, Miguel Cabrera is earning $30 million. So you have to kind of ask yourself, what's his going rate going to be to sign J.D. Martinez? Is it going to be $20 million a year? Do you think that he's a guy that's worth that? I don't know. That's right. That's probably right at the range he's going to be looking at. And if he continues to have that, he could significantly increase his value. So I'm thinking along the lines that J.D. Martinez his contract needs to be, looked at and taken care of early, because the longer you wait for a guy like J.D. Martinez, the more you risk the fact that he could go elsewhere. And if he does go elsewhere, oh my gosh, look at the hole he leaves in this offense. He really is a guy that's been benefiting from the tutelage of Victor Martinez. He seems like a guy that's enthusiastic, and he's a guy that is a significant piece in the Detroit Tigers lineup, and you definitely do not want him to leave this organization just due to the fact that you didn't have the foresight to look into his contract and look into his situation. So in my honest opinion, I fully agree with that. I don't think that I don't think in this situation you have to wait until his contract's up. You decide as an organization, hey, do we want this guy to be the face of the organization. And if he's going to hit 35 to 40 home runs, if he's going to be a key RBI guy, if he's going to be the guy that you can slot in there in the fourth hole when maybe Miguel's hurt or situations arise and you can move him up, or he can be that fourth, fifth guy and he can benefit from having Miguel Cabrera and Victor Martinez bat in front of him. You definitely need to take advantage of that. And I don't see any arguments that you could make for not securing the services of JD Martinez early. I mean, but when you go out there, sometimes, in the 2015 season, it was a little bit challenging to go out to Comerica Park to watch the Tigers because of the play. It got away from them quickly. They had an 8-game losing streak, and then it just all fell away from them. So having a guy like JD Martinez can also be a benefit to the organization in that if you secure him long term, he can be a guy that's box office, a guy that people can be willing to pay some top dollar money to come see night in, night out at Comerica Park. Because you got to remember, there are 81 home games, and you got to have attractions. And you got Miguel Cabrera, but in recent seasons, he's been dealing with injuries. Victor Martinez has been up and down. You're going to need guys that can put butts in the seat. And a guy like JD Martinez, if you invest in him heavily, can be a guy that can draw people. He can draw people to Comerica Park night in, night out, and he can also contribute to victories. I don't think the Tigers' window is completely shut, knowing that Al Avila has the backing of the organization to go out and spend money. How much? That'll be the question. That'll be the thing we're going to watch this 2015 offseason is who's going to be brought in. Are they going to bring in name guys? Are they going to keep the payroll around $170 to $180 million? And if you secure the services of JD Martinez, I believe it can truly help the organization, not only this season, but in the future. He can be a cornerstone guy. And just based on his performance the last couple seasons, you can now say, we can kind of put aside the question marks that people have been saying, that Adam and I have been mentioning on the podcast. Is JD Martinez for real? Dude is for real. Dude is serious, and dude can be a guy that you can lock up. And I think you should take advantage of it early because, if JD Martinez hits free agency, I think the likelihood that he comes back to the Tigers diminishes because, when you're a free agent and you have everybody courting you, then there is a strong likelihood that an offer could come in that could be really over the top in the $25 million a year range should he put together two more seasons hitting 38 to 40 home runs. And also, too, remember, he likely had lost maybe 5 to 7 home runs playing at Comerica Park. He was at 38. If he was playing at another ballpark with smaller dimensions, then he could have realistically had 44 to 46 home runs this year. Several hits that were bombs just died out there in Comerica Park because of the dimensions. And I seriously think that the management of the Tigers should really look at kind of also retooling the dimensions of Comerica Park just a little bit like they did in the past in terms of the outrageous center field there at Comerica Park. And that'll add to the likelihood that you could bring other offensive weapons here at Comerica Park. But the fourth story this week on the Detroit Sports Countdown podcast, the Tigers should definitely give JD Martinez a big deal early to secure his services. Now on to the number 3 story. Oh, man. It started off being the early success of the Wings earlier in the week. I had jotted down number 3, early success of the Wings. But the last 2 games, they've taken losses to Carolina and to the Montreal Canadiens. Not the best performances, but in the end, it's the early part of the season. There are still great storylines with these Red Wings, and again, highlighted by Dylan Larkin doing some things that haven't ever been done in NHL history by putting up a point in each of his first 5 NHL games. That's kind of in rare form, knowing that I think they read the report that no one had ever produced a point in his first 4 NHL games as a rookie, and Dylan Larkin now has scored a point in each of his first 5 games, marked by a great goal versus Montreal the other night. But right now, the Red Wings are struggling a little bit, giving up a little bit more goals, and I really enjoyed watching the game versus Montreal after the Michigan State game. I really wanted to see how the Wings I really want to see this year how the Wings perform against teams like Tampa Bay, how they perform against teams like the Rangers, how they perform against teams like the Montreal Canadiens. those guys are place setters in the division, and you're going to have to really match up well if you're going to get a higher seed. A lot of people are slating the Red Wings to be in the lower half, maybe a 4 to 8 seed. I thought, based on the early start to the year, that, wow, if everything stays well, if everyone's healthy, early on we had some injuries to Helm, injuries to DeKaiser. I know Helm is on his way back, so all is great. He'll be a great addition. But if the Red Wings do not perform well against these teams in the division, it's going to be really tough to get home ice advantage. And last year, it played to form that the Red Wings had Game 7 in Tampa Bay, and they were unable to advance. They played some great games, in the series versus Tampa Bay, but they were not able to secure the deal. But I do believe had the Red Wings had home ice advantage, it might have been a different story in that playoff matchup. So the Red Wings have to come out early and play well against these teams, and so far, a little bit of a struggle. I was a little bit surprising loss to Carolina, but wasn't too surprised based on the way they played versus Montreal. Montreal kind of dictated play. They were a little bit more physical than the Wings, and they took advantage of some situations and got the puck in the net. But it's still early in the season. I do like what I'm seeing from the Red Wings. I like the fact that Dylan Larkin has lived up to the hype. He's a guy that's putting up, he's worthy of his first-line status. And it's great to see. It's great to see a guy with that maturity stepping up and helping the Wings out in great situations. And I really do believe that he is benefiting so greatly from playing on a line with Zetterberg and Justin Abdelkader. What a great line that is. And I think that can be one of the top lines in the NHL, should they stay together and should they continue to gel like they have. I've been thoroughly impressed so far with the Wings this season. My only question marks in terms of the struggles with the Wings are, I don't like the fact of switching goaltenders. I'm not a fan of the two-goalie system. It really hasn't shown to be effective that many times in the NHL. I know they're trying to determine whether or not, Jimmy Howard is the guy as opposed to Peter Mrazek, and I know that they're showcasing Jimmy Howard a little bit because of the contract and things like that. But I do believe Jeff Blashill, it would behoove him to really make a decision. And I'm surprised based on the preseason. I'm surprised based on watching these two goalies that he can't make a decision. I really believe that Peter Mrazek can be a goaltender that can play 50 to 55 games this year while giving Jimmy Howard the rest of the games. I don't understand why Peter Mrazek has to continue to, have Jimmy Howard over his shoulders because of the fact that we already know what Jimmy Howard can produce. Now, people on the other side will make the argument that, well, Jimmy Howard has lost even more weight, he's gotten stronger, he looks even better, and that when Jimmy Howard is injury-free, he's a top-notch goalie. Very true to form, but can he sustain that throughout the course of a season? Last year, the same thing was said, that he was playing the best that he'd ever played, but at the same time, he got hurt, and that's when Mrazek came in and started to showcase his abilities. I truly believe that a guy like Peter Mrazek can be a top 5 goaltender in the NHL in the next season or two. And why are we limiting his potential? Why is he not out there getting in these tough games? I think realistically, he should have played all the games except one. Maybe one back-to-back, you throw Howard in there to keep him on point and to keep him fresh. But Peter Mrazek needs to be out there. I don't understand why the Wings have taken this stance. I'm going to keep my eye on this story because I truly believe that the Red Wings are a solid top 4 team in the division and can earn a high seed. But if they continue to play around with the goaltending situation, if they limit the stars that they do have on this team, then things can maybe dip and they could end up being in the bottom 4. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see the Wings open on the road. I want to see them open at home, earn home ice advantage in the playoffs, and do some damage. But we'll got to wait and see. It's still early to judge Blashill. We're still seeing his system being put in place, and right now the Red Wings are in a challenging spot in the season, and we'll see what happens going forward. But the number 3 story on the Detroit Sports Countdown podcast: the trials and tribulations of the Detroit Red Wings this week. All right, the number 2 story this week: very fascinating look at the relationship between a franchise quarterback and his head coach. Earlier, when the Detroit Lions got trounced by the Arizona Cardinals, Matthew Stafford was warned by head coach Jim Caldwell that if you throw another interception in this game after throwing some terrible, terrible interceptions that turned the momentum for Arizona in that game last week, he was warned. And that warning kind of sent shockwaves when it was kind of released, knowing that, wow, an organization typically doesn't treat its franchise quarterback like that. In the end, Matthew Stafford did not take heed to the warning, and he threw another pick, a terrible interception to Peterson, and he was taken from the game. Last week's benching of Matthew Stafford is a number 2 story this week on the podcast. I'm very shocked that Matthew Stafford was pulled from the game. He definitely deserved to be based on his play. His play last week was horrible and contributed to the trouncing of the Lions by the Cardinals. But it really sent off a lot of shockwaves because in the end, analysts all across the country realized that, hey, once franchise quarterbacks get pulled, it doesn't usually lead to great outcomes. And looking at it and exploring what happened, it's really devastating for the Lions, knowing that, okay, now are we starting the process of distancing ourselves from Matthew Stafford? Is he the guy that's going to lead this organization to the promised land? I'm starting to believe, and I'm starting to lean towards saying it's time to move on from Matthew Stafford. If you were given a warning, that's basically saying we don't think that you are the guy that can help us win games. And he went out there and he tried his absolute best. He was unable to get it done. He was warned, don't throw another pick. And he still did, and he was benched. And his look on the sideline was definitely a look of someone who was lionized, definitely was the look of someone who was defeated. It's setting off a bunch of discussions regarding, well, whose fault is this? Is it the Lions' fault that Stafford's regressed because of Lombardi's terrible system? Or is it the fact that at this point in time, Matthew Stafford, being a 7th-year quarterback, should be able to adjust in his second year to a system and have success? Matthew Stafford is now on lists that you don't want to be on, lists of guys who throw the most interceptions, lists of guys who don't win big games, and now we have to decide as a Lions organization what they're going to do. It's really right now putting them in a tough spot because do you extend this guy? Do you give him another $100 million deal? No. You definitely don't need to be looking that road because he hasn't won games against good teams. He can pad his stats, in situations when they're losing, and he had that one big season that he can cash in on, but I think he's done that already. He's cashed in on that 5,000-yard passing season in 2011. But since then, he's regressed. It's a combination of the terrible organization, the terrible offensive line, and the fact is that Matthew Stafford as a quarterback hasn't gotten better. His footwork isn't consistent. His touch throws are terrible. Yes, when you look at Matthew Stafford, you can always say he's got a strong arm. He can make the throws, but he's not able to consistently execute them week in and week out. That screen pass was terrible. That screen pass was indicative of his trials and tribulations. He needed to put a little bit of extra touch to get the ball over the defender, but Corey Redding read it, jumped up, and intercepted the ball. Now he didn't give up on the play, Matthew Stafford, and tackled Corey Redding. But in the end, Matthew Stafford was benched by the organization the first time. And everyone is like, why this year? Adam on the podcast has been adamant. Why didn't they go out and draft Hundley? At this point in time, you're 0-5. You could have threw him in there. It couldn't get any worse. Every week, we are waiting for Stafford to show us something that can give us some confidence that this guy can lead us. And in all honesty, not to be mean and not to be cruel, but this guy deserves no longer to play with the Lions. He hasn't done enough. Yeah, okay, maybe in a perfect situation with a perfect line, with a great running back, with great receivers, but you weren't able to win with Calvin Johnson, and you weren't able to win with the defense that you had last year, a top 10 defense in the history of the NHL, a top 10 defense in the history of the NFL. It's not right, and it's the situation that's hurting the organization, and Matthew Stafford's play on the field is not helping this team win, and that's a shame, and that's a challenge for the fans because we have been waiting for a guy to take us to where we need to go. And Matthew Stafford, I thought, when he was drafted number 1, could have been that guy based on his early play, but unfortunately, offensive coordinators have changed, head coaches have changed, and he has not done well with this situation. And so for the number 2 story this week, Matthew Stafford benched by the Detroit Lions. And now you've waited. Thank you for listening. The number 1 story this week, I think you know what it's going to be. I wonder what the number 1 story this week is. My goodness. So my viewing habit for the Michigan State game was simple. It was my little nephew's 2nd birthday party at my sister's house. So I went to my sister and brother-in-law's house fully dressed in green, surrounded by everyone else who was Michigan fans. So we sit down, we get ready. The pregame was excellent. Watching the game early on, kind of had a great big game feel. And then, it happened. The refs kind of interjected, and it really kind of sucked on both ends that the officials took matters into their own hands and made some calls that really affected the game. And obviously the one was the call in terms of ejecting the Michigan defender. What a tough call, because he was pushed by a Michigan State Sparty, but his helmet hit Connor Cooks. He was ejected, and everyone at that time was like, "Oh, bullshit, horseshit call, terrible." And of course, as a Sparty, you never want you want to beat Michigan with their full allotment of players, but it was a bad call. What should have happened was, when that play occurred, it should have been a personal foul for leading with the helmet into Connor Cooks, but he should not have been ejected. They replayed that. How nonsensical is that they replayed that and still ejected him for targeting? And that's obviously going to be a rule that's going to be looked at again. And at that point in the game, it was very back and forth. It was a situation in which both teams were really fighting for inches. Both teams didn't even crack 75 yards each running. I think it was a little bit of an edge to Michigan in the game, but both defensive line played excellent, and it went down to the wire. Michigan State had a chance to come back offensively in the fourth quarter, and Michigan's defense made a great stand, and it was 4th and 19, and they held it. They held on, and Michigan got the ball back, and they were conservative. Now, one of the plays that I was watching nervously, tweeting back and forth with Cousin Adam, tweeting back and forth with all the Michigan fans, using my own Twitter account to kind of, stir the pot a little bit. And I got some great reactions. We got great banter back and forth. But in the end, Michigan made a couple key mistakes, and there's one person solely responsible for the loss, and it's not the punter O'Neal. Hear me out. The one sole person to blame for the loss that Michigan had to Michigan State was not the punter. It was your head coach, Michigan fans, Jim Harbaugh. And the reason why I say that was, it was second down play, and going into third down, Jim Harbaugh calls a timeout to stop the clock with about 56 seconds left. And I looked to, my brother-in-law's dad, and I'm like, oh, that could come back to haunt Michigan, because you don't ever want to stop the clock. Why? Why stop the clock? And I know that they were, considering doing some things and maybe talking things over, but I would have let the clock run. And in the end, then Jim Harbaugh decides on fourth down with approximately 12 seconds left to kick the ball off, punt the ball. Now, Michigan State brought 11. So in essence, if O'Neal catches the ball and kicks it, it's done. Michigan State's not going to have enough time, but he bobbled the ball. So an argument can be made now, playing armchair quarterback here on the podcast. You could have made an argument. You could have ran a play on fourth down, shotgun play, another, three-step drop, run around as fast as you can, and heave the ball up, to anybody. That logistically would have maybe taken another 8 to 9 seconds off the clock. You would have been, in a position where if you did turn the ball over to Michigan State with time, they weren't going to kick a 50 to 60-yard field goal. Michigan State's special teams was atrocious, and I don't think they even attempted a field goal the whole game. So in the end, the blame and the number one story is the Michigan State victory, raw team fight, victory for MSU in a miraculous fashion, because in the end, the punt was botched. Michigan State ran it back. Unbelievable, miraculous play. And in the household, everyone was screaming like, oh, we got it. He's running. And I'm still in shock. And then at the end, I'm screaming I was screaming, get out of bounds, get down so we can kick the field goal. At that point, the shock took over me, and I was like, get down so we can kick the field goal. I did not in my wildest dreams believe he would actually get the ball and get it into the end zone for the victory. And in the end, it was a miraculous play. The only time the Spartans had the lead was at that point in the game, and it was miraculous. It was probably one of the top 3 games that I've ever seen, and Michigan State has now had in this. I've now seen some miraculous comebacks and some great plays with the Michigan State football team. It was fascinating. You had the Keith Nickel play when Kirk Cousins tossed the ball deep in the Hail Mary, the Keith Nickel play. You had, Little Giants versus Notre Dame. Unbelievable what happened there with Michigan State. And, hey, all credits deserved. Both teams played great. Michigan is back. I mean, I can't sit here and lie to everybody. Michigan's back. They played a solid game. They had to lead the entire game. Beautifully executed game plan from Michigan on the defensive end. They held the Michigan State running game, but you have to give credit to Connor Cook, who threw for over 300 yards, and he did it in now back-to-back games. You have to give credit to Connor Cook for his play in that game. He made some teardrop passes. He stood there like the pocket quarterback that we all love here as Sparty fans, and he really, I thought, cemented his stock and did some things that were very, very proficient and helped the Michigan State offense. He made some great throws, and at times the Michigan State receivers didn't help out. And I do believe a couple key plays for Michigan State, a couple plays and decisions made by D'Antonio and the coaching staff hurt the Michigan State Spartans. Going for it on fourth down, I thought was a bad spot at that time. You could have kicked the ball away, rely on the defense, and you didn't get it. So that, I thought, gave Michigan some momentum and was a play maybe if they look back on it and were to examine some mistakes made by Michigan State. That was one of them. And other situations where I really felt the Michigan State play calling was really, really predictable on first down, run, first down. And it really put the offense in a tough spot because, in essence, Michigan's defense was solid the majority of the game. So I thought, they should have really relied on the play action on a couple downs there on first down, be a little bit more creative. But I thought that Michigan State tried their darndest to establish the run. It just didn't happen. I really wish Madre London would have been in that game to see if they would have been a little bit more effective. But in the end, Michigan did win the rushing battle, barely by less than, I think, 10 yards. But I thought that Michigan State did themselves a disservice by running it so much on first down, and it led to some second and third down plays that were just, challenging third and long situations that really made it tough to keep drives going. And all credit to Michigan's defense. It was really something to behold and really something that really sparked back to 97's defense, to some of the defenses of the past that were really outstanding. But Michigan made it a game. I was so thrilled. I'm happy Michigan was ranked number 12, so that gives Michigan State a boost. I don't believe they're going to drop in the rankings this week. I fully hope as this podcast comes out that we do get into the top 5. I really thought it was disrespectful to keep dropping Michigan State, but there's a long list of undefeated teams, but Michigan State deserves to be out there because they fought to the end. The number one story on the Detroit Sports Countdown podcast, Michigan State victorious over Michigan at the Big House. Shocked the world, baby. That's what we Sparties do. We fight till the end. Raw team fight. Victory for MSU. I want to thank everybody for downloading this podcast. Hopefully you can message me at Detroit Podcast. Let me know what you thought of the rankings. And again, to recap, number 5, Franzen put on the IR. Concussions. Doc thinks he should retire. Number 4, the Tigers should definitely consider getting J.D. Martinez locked up and get him a big deal now or risk losing him. Or number 3, the challenge this week that the Wings had, losing back-to-back games, and the success of Dylan Larkin in his first 5. Very, very fascinating. A situation that needs to be monitored and hopefully can continue because Dylan Larkin's on the verge of superstardom here in Detroit. Number 2, the franchise quarterback benched last week versus Arizona, really sparking off the debate of what's next for Matthew Stafford and his relationship with the Detroit Lions. And the number 1 story, Michigan State, the miracle at the Big House, watched by many and will be talked about forever. Always now, going into the game, Michigan was definitely hyped up, and now we can always add, as Sparty fans, something, the punter play, the miracle at the Big House. And it's something as a Sparty fan I relish, and I look forward to continuing the banter, the sports provocateur here at the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, continuing to have great debates with Michigan fans. But for the next year, it's all good. Michigan State's going to have the bragging rights for the next 12 months. It's all good at the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Thank you for supporting us. Download all the podcasts at DetroitSportsPodcast.com, iTunes, Stitcher. Big thanks to the DetroitSportsNation.com website. We greatly appreciate your support. For next week, this is the Doc on the Detroit Sports Countdown podcast. See everybody next week.